Imagine loving someone deeply while slowly watching mental illness, emotional exhaustion, and financial pressure tear your marriage apart. Today's conversation is about the side of severe mental illness people rarely talk about, the impact it has on spouses, families, finances, and the impossible decisions that sometimes follow. Welcome to Overcome with Travis White. Today's guest is Austi Stenson. Welcome to the show, Austi.
Thanks for having me.
And I don't want to waste any time for people to listen to my voice, so I'm going to just hand you the microphone.
All right. Well, questionable decision. No, I was thinking about how to approach this, and I figured I needed to lay a little bit of groundwork because the rest of the context makes a lot more sense. So I was a 32-year-old Mormon virgin getting married to a man from a different country, a different country, a different culture. What could possibly go wrong, right? Just a lot of he and I were really opposite people. We had dated for a couple years and really loved each other, and it was right timing and felt right. Um, about a month in to our marriage, maybe a couple of months, just started acting really strange. And it wasn't anything totally obnoxious, like it wasn't anything majorly different, but it was just like subtly something was off, and it just really struck me like I was really caught off guard, like, something's different here. And he called me home from work and he just said, I want to get a divorce and I'm leaving right now. And I was like, we haven't even fought. Like, I was just like, we're 2 months in. I was like, oh my gosh, like, that must have been a really just horrible honeymoon or something. I was just like, what is happening? And so I kind of just like was in shock, to be honest with you, because that's just not what you expect. And anyway, he came back a few days later and apologized, and it just was like, you're just in shock. But I did not know what was happening, and he just from that point on was just really strange with me. He just wasn't really making eye contact. He was kind of being cold and distant, and I truly thought, like, I've married someone who married me for the wrong reason. Like, he married me and now, like, something. I don't know, but I just was like, he's not him, something happened. So I called up a couples therapist and I said, "Hey, I am just really confused and maybe I'm overthinking things because this is like my first like real relationship, you know." So I just was like, "Can I just talk to an expert?" So I called a couples counselor and we showed up and I sat down with him on day 1 and I just said, "Here's the deal. I did not get married because I was lonely. I did not get married for money. I did not get married for sex. I did not get married for any other reason than I was ready and I loved him and we were on the same page." And I said, "I'm willing to work this out with him. I'm willing to get a divorce. I just need to know what flip what switch just flipped because I'm feeling really uneasy about the man that I've just welcomed into my life, right?" Um, and so full transparency, I was just really, on the defense. Like, there was this definite, like, he now might be the enemy. So and so I kinda got ready to spar with him because I was like, "I don't know what your angle is, buddy, but you're messing with the wrong person." And, yeah, it just was these subtle little things, and he would I was getting kind of emotional, obviously, because I was just, like, still in shock from him leaving and all these different things, and so I would get really emotional, and he would just kind of laugh at me. Um, and context for that is, like, on my wedding day, my mom told a story about, like, "Just so you know, when Austi was a kid, rather than cry, she'd hold her breath until she passed out. Like, Austi doesn't cry." So the fact that my whole first 2 months of marriage, I was just, like, sobbing in bed, I was like, "What is happening? This does not feel like me." And so we kept going back and things just kind of got subtly weirder and weirder and just, like, something is off, I just couldn't quite put my hand on it, you know? Um, and so finally, one day we were driving to the the pharmacy because he was sick and he needed some meds, just like a standard sickness kinda thing. And on the way there, he just said to me, "My family is, like, not the same anymore." And just kind of out of the blue, you know? And I was like, "What do you mean? Like, since you got married, like, are they treating you different?" And he's like, "Yeah." And I just kinda thought, you know, he has a bunch of sisters and maybe it was just, like, they're not sure how to let their little brother be married or, you know, something like that. I just kind of was in my own head making up a story of some kind, and so we got to the place to check out, and I mentioned something about his sister or his mom. I asked a question, and he just, like, shut down. And I was like, "Oh my gosh," like, he's acting like I really said something super offensive. I was like, "I'm so sorry, like, are you okay?" And he just wouldn't talk to me. And so we go to get in the car to drive home, and he stops me and he goes, "Wait, don't go anywhere." And he's just staring at me, and he kinda has this, like, just droopy, like, intense but dead kind of face, and it just was like, "What is happening? Like, do you wanna talk about something? Like, did I offend you? Like, we can talk about it," and he just wouldn't let me drive, but he wouldn't let me it is just this weird, awkward, like, passive aggressive thing, and I'm just trying to put all my logic to it, like, what is happening here? I don't get this, and anyway, things just kept getting weirder and weirder, so finally we went back to this therapist, and he said, I've exhausted, like, all the things I know to do is, like, there's just so many weird things happening that I can't" he didn't use the word weird, but just so many things that I just can't quite figure out what the motive is, and he goes, "I think you maybe need to look into, like, a bipolar or a schizophrenia or something." And so he referred us to somebody, and we showed up, and I said, "Hi, I know this is, like, strange, but he, like, doesn't look at me." And I'm just listing these things that just kinda made me feel like an idiot, like, you know, "My husband doesn't look me in the eye," or something, but it was just, like, on a different level that you know because you've been with this person for years, and you know that that's not how they are, and so I explained all these seemingly mundane symptoms, and the doctor was like, "Oh, yeah, all of those things are indicative of somebody being in a psychotic state or someone being with in a psychosis." And I was like, "Huh?" And he's like, "Yeah, every single one of those." And he's like, "That's not a disease or anything." He's like, "It's a cluster of symptoms, and it could be a signal of schizophrenia or bipolar or any number schizoaffective disorder or bipolar or something." Um, and so we started asking questions, and it turns out that my husband, now ex-husband, but my husband had basically was taking an ADHD medication before we were married, and he was working, like, 14-hour days trying to save up money to get married, and he was like, "Oh, let me just take, like, twice as much as I was prescribed because I need twice as much focus." And then when that made him anxious, he's like, "I'm too anxious, I'm gonna come off this cold turkey." And so he came off of this medication cold turkey, like, right when we got married, and it just kicked his brain into a different state, and the timing of it was so unfortunate because his sister could sense that something was off, and his behavior was also unusual toward his family, and so their theory was that I was, like, drugging him and abusing them, and this is being translated because his sister's here, but most of his family is in a different country in a different language, and so everything's being translated through his sister-in-law who thinks I'm literally, like, just tackling like, keeping her brother locked up in a cage in the basement or something, and it was just so intense for a long.
So crazy.
Yeah.
Like, I'm like, don't even know what to say because it's like, d so when he actually got the diagnosis, how did that, like, look for your relationship at that time?
Yeah, so at this point, we were about 6 months into marriage, um, and or maybe it was 3 months, 3 or 6, I don't know, honestly, the last decade of my life doesn't even exist in my own brain anymore, but we were 3 or 6 months into marriage, I think it was 3, and the doctor basically was like, "It's possible that this was drug induced, it's possible this is genetic, and the stress of getting married," and he lost his father, this was right after COVID, but a time when a lot of people
Mhm.
were having a lot of stress, and he's like, "It could be, like, his new, kind of lot in life. This might be totally drug induced, and he could metabolize it and go completely back to himself in 6 or 9 months." And so, you're sitting there, you're 3 months into a marriage, you've just vowed, in sickness and health, and I'm like, "I'm 3 months in, like, roll up those sleeves, like, I'm in it," and for 3 more months to get someone back that I've, waited my whole life to meet, and, so I kinda just took the mentality of, like, "Okay, we're just, like, buckling down, like, this is what marriage vows mean." And, So the next few months, I can't say were pretty. Like, I think in that moment, I really thought, "I'm gonna do great." And then my true colors came out, like, my true, like, lack of resilience showed up because it just was so hard, like, every day because, he's a grown man, but he's actively living in a reality that doesn't reflect my own reality, and not to mention that, but he also had a bunch of physical ailments going on. He had, like, a bowel disease and a bunch of things, so he was, like, constantly sick and physically sick, and then mentally not quite aware of what was happening, and so it just felt like I felt like I was sort of in his reality, like, it was just kind of everything moving 1,000 miles an hour and a new bill showing up every single day, and every day straight for the first 3.5 months of our marriage, something broke in the house that was at least $100, like, and I'm talking, like, all the way up to, like, 6,000. Like, our water heater broke, there was a root canal, we had, like, 4 check engine lights across 3 different cars. It was just, like, everything kept breaking and bills kept coming, and I'm trying to work a full-time job and figure this out, and it was just so much all at one time.
At this point, was he still working?
So he was working, for the first while, but then, there was a moment when his uh, he basically closed up shop one day early. He was working, by himself one day, and he basically decided I think what he the story later came out that he hallucinated that Justin Bieber had invited him to go drinking and clubbing in Salt Lake City. So he so he locked up shop, came home, and I was like, "Oh, you're home early," and it just didn't really seem that big a deal. Um, we'd kind of gotten in a bit of a fight the day before or something just 'cause tension was really high at this point. It was just I was spiraling, and at this point, I think there was still kind of a residual effect of, like, me thinking this guy was, like, trying to harm me in some way. There was just this subconscious, like, he is the enemy kind of, like, programming inside me that's just like, "You're not safe." And so anyway, so he's like, "I'm gonna go up to Salt Lake and hang out with some friends," and I was like, "Awesome. I could really use just, like, a night to chill." And, he didn't come back that night, and the next morning when I woke up, he wasn't there, and I had just started a brand new job, and so I was like, "Okay, I gotta go to my new job, like, I can't lose my job, I gotta go," and so I was trying to call him and stuff and, like, leaving him messages, and on my lunch break, I checked my voicemail, and the local courthouse was like, "Hi, an incarcerated person is trying to reach you," and that's not a call.
That you were expecting, I bet.
Like Molly Mormon, like straight A student, like, gosh darn and golly, like, I'm just like, "An incarcerated what?" And I'm like, "What is happening?" And just everything that was happening was kind of just like an alternate reality. It's like, that's not my life, that's somebody else's life, like, I just it was so weird. And, yeah, I guess he had gone out drinking, Justin Bieber didn't show up, and so he drove home, and got pulled over for drunk driving, um and the wilder thing is they just, like, let him out in Salt Lake with no car keys, no wallet, no phone. He's he's having schizoaffective episodes, and they, like, just set him free, and so he basically, like, hitchhiked from Salt Lake down to Pleasant Grove and just was, like, trying to figure out how
That's
to get there. So it was just a wild day and a wild
yeah,
ride.
that's crazy. Could you look at him and tell when he was in this state of psychosis?
Yeah, I didn't realize it at the time, but his eyes just went really dark, and it was just this sort of vacant but creepy presence, and it's just so not him because, like, he has the kindest eyes, and he's just like this, like, soft, kind, gentle creature, and then he just had this kind of hollow, sinister, like, creepy look, honestly. It, like, really scared me, sometimes, and he'd also get really combative, and he's just not, like, normally that way, but he'd kinda just start, like, picking fights and just a weird like, a personality that's like, there's a guy out there who that's his personality. That's not this guy, and it just was really strange, and I just couldn't quite figure out what it was.
Yeah, I can imagine, though, when he gets in that state, he's just highly irritable.
Yeah. And the
So
farther it went along, the more he felt sort of like I quit my job. So I was only at that new job for like 2 weeks, and then I basically had to go into the new boss and be like, my husband's, like, wandering off in the middle of the day, like, I need to quit and go home and just, like, manage the situation." Um, yeah, it
yeah,
was
my wife can say little bits and pieces about that. So like when I get really stressed out and stuff, and when I was going through some of my medical stuff, I dissociate.
Mhm,
So basically, I'm not aware of what's going on around me, but I'll do stupid things, and sometimes I'll wander off. I remember I drove an hour and a half, not knowing who I was, and I was supposed to be somewhere else.
mhm,
And at the time, I wasn't married yet, so she called me. Time my fiance had called me, and she said, "Where are you? You were supposed to be at work." I said, "Well, I'm at a log cabin," and she knows a log cabin is my parents' house.
mm.
So she had to drive down and come get me and have somebody else drive with her to pick up my car. But so it's like it's crazy.
That's the
Just
thing, like, you care about the person,
yeah.
and you know that they're not doing the things they're doing because that's their life choice, and it's like it's the weirdest thing, and I just tried to explain it, like, it's like, I'm not a parent, but I'm like, I'm sure it's like what a parent feels like when their kid is doing something, that's not safe for them, but the difference is, like but you're an adult and, like, there's adult consequences. Like, if he had hurt somebody while drunk driving
Mhm.
is a life like, you could have
So,
altered
yeah,
lives,
yep.
and you did, and so it's just kind of one of those things where I'm like, I'm trying to prevent you from, like, really shooting yourself in the foot, and it's just a really hard thing because then with at least with schizoaffective, with psychosis, you have a likelihood of paranoia, and so there was also some, "You're trying to control me," and so it's this really delicate balance of, like, me trying to control him because I didn't want him wandering off and hurting someone, but also not letting him know, this is just it was like just a mind game the whole time. I was just on high alert for
Uh,
9 months straight.
and so when you were actually trying to help him, did he accept that help ever, or was he just kind of pushing you away?
For the first long time, he did, like, when we were going to therapy and then we were going to the the physician whose, like, specialty is, medication for mental health. Like, it's helping that specific area, and then he actually referred us to a specialist who does a really in-depth diagnostic, and so I was I was trying to help him, and at first he kinda was just passive and was, like, going along with it, but then that sister of his was like, "She's doing this to you. She's the one making you sick. This isn't who you really are," and so then he started to be like, "Wait, you gave me these drugs. You made me sick." And then you're trying to explain to him, "No, you're on an antipsychotic because you were acting because you were experiencing psychosis," like, and he just couldn't he's like, "No, you're doing this," and so, it's just hard because you're not dealing with the same reality, it's 2 different realities, and there's no consensus in that.
Yes, for sure. And so
It's
I take it from there was no signs of any of this type of stuff before. Like,
no, at least not on my maybe I just didn't see it because like I said, it's not like he woke up on day 1,
mhm,
saw unicorns in the sky.
yeah,
That happened on day 300, but on day, 15, it's just a little less eye contact than normal. That's
yeah,
not necessarily something you spot when you're not living with someone and spending, like, day in, day out with them.
yeah, for sure. And did you know anything about schizoaffective disorder before, or was this just an idle opener to you?
No, I mean, I did taken classes in high school and college of psychology and stuff, and so I've always been really interested in that, um, but I've never known anyone to have it, and so I think one of the things I've, like, learned a lot about is just the spectrum of mental health, um, because I know there's a lot of stigma around something like schizoaffective, right? And people would kinda jump to the most extreme, but there are a lot of days where he's just, like, not really making eye contact and a little bit dissociated. And You don't realize that he's in a totally different place in his head, but it's not this, like, screaming, blaring, thing. It's a very
Yeah,
subtle thing that it's hard to catch on to and is really hard to live with because you know it's not your person, and it almost gaslights you to be like, "Something is off." Like, I know you're not you, but you're not, like, doing anything too different, and so it's just this weird all your spidey senses are going off, but you can't figure out why, and so then you start to think, "Well, am I just being, like, this, like, bizarre is it me?" I don't know. So
that's it's all crazy to me. But that's a good way, like, to explain it. Is you could tell that he was just a little bit off, and somewhere in his head he's dealing with something different.
Mhm,
Because somebody once asked me, like, how do you even explain, like, being in that state of mind? It's like, well, my body's here, but my mind's not.
mhm.
So, how difficult was it trying to balance compassion for your husband while also protecting your own mental health?
I think I did the worst of both. I think I was a really good case on what not to do. I'm very problem solver, pragmatic, which I think at times, can be interpreted as like, "Oh, she doesn't love him." 'Cause no if a wife found that out about a husband, she wouldn't react like that, and I'm like, "No, I'm a problem solver. I will grieve this and process this later, but as long as there's a fire in front of me, I've got the hose and I'm on the front line?" So, I think there was a lot of, like, me trying to process my grief because it was, like, such a jarring experience to marry someone that you, like, love on every level and you're sharing, like, your whole life with, and it's all awesome, and then all of a sudden, it's just, like, gone, and maybe he's even doing some like, all the betrayal, and then there's grief, and there's fear, and there's just, like, embarrassment, and there's all these different feelings that you're trying to, like, process, but also kind of at least for me, I was, like, shielding myself from it, like, I was like, "I cannot process my shame right now because I have to deal with" like, I was like, "We can't even think about the fact that he just walked out on you, like, that's gonna be processed years from now," but there's just like, I was mean, like, because I don't know, like, I just was kind of mean to him sometimes because he'd be doing something or saying something, and it was just like it just it was so overwhelming, like and I think part of it like, here's a good example, and it's the stupidest example, but, um, he'd left his job, um, and that would made sense, and I had left, I eventually had to quit mine, and I was just doing side hustles to, like, bring in money to pay bills, but I was kind of, like, getting really resentful just because I think, like I've heard that resentment is most closely tied to grief, and I really think that's what it was. It was just, like, I was not having that newlywed experience that I was, like, expecting to have had, that honeymoon phase, and so I was like, "Could you just go out and, like, trim the bushes in the back?" Like, I was just like, "Could you do something that just, like, helps me feel like I don't have to maintain a mortgage and a yard and a job and your health and my health," and I was just like, "Can you just, like, go do that for me?" And he's like, "Sure." And, he's not he's lived in apartments his whole life and just hasn't really done a lot of yard work, and so I was like, "The bush looks like this, you just wanna make it like this," you know? And so I give him the clippers and I'm like, "You can't go wrong." Anyway, I go out like 2 hours later, and he had just cut the center out of the bush. So it was like Moses had walked right near the center of the bush, and it was just like 2 halves, and I could see the fence through the back, and I lost it. I just was like, "What is happening?" And of course, he's like, "Oh, thought I did a good job,"
Yeah,
and he's, like, childlike, and he's like it almost is like a little kid being like, "Mom, but I drew you a picture on the wall," and the mom was like, "That's my best wall." So I just kinda lost it sometimes because it was just like this lunacy on top of anger, on top of grief, on top of sadness, on top of fear, like, it was just so many compounding emotions, I just couldn't process it very well, and then he'd look at me with this, like, childlike face and be like, "Why are you so mad right now?" And then I'd feel horrible because 'cause I'm screaming, so
yeah.
it was not
It,
pretty.
and I apologize. I shouldn't laugh because really it's not funny, but your Moses analogy got me.
It's that's the thing is, like, in hindsight now, there are so many things that happened that I'm like, "That's a hilarious story." at the time, you're like, "This is, like, the farthest thing from funny," and I'm actually, like,
Well,
living
and
slash grieving slash all the
yeah,
things.
but in some cases, like, I feel like you almost have to laugh. Like,
Yeah.
and maybe that's just my personality. Maybe nobody will agree with me, but I feel like laughter is the best medicine. At least it is for me.
I will say I tried that at the beginning, and then it just kept happening. Like, when you've got the Moses bush and then the water heater breaks and then, like, thing after thing after thing after thing, it just was like, "Wait, this isn't actually funny, and I don't actually think I can, like, keep this up." Like, this is just really hard and exhausting, and I'm speaking very much about, like, "Oh, I'm this victim over here." Like, what's also hard is the additional layer of knowing at the end of the day that he's not doing any of this on purpose. That he's actually treating me very well in terms of, like, he's actually being really kind and sweet, and so there's, like, this guilt also that's like, he didn't ask for this, and it's like, he's not this isn't a lack of character that he's cutting this bush wrong or whatever, but it's just so many things at one time that you're trying to process and so many conflicting things, but also so many things where you have to be honest with yourself of like, "Oh, I was not patient right then. I did not handle that well. Um, I may not be able to be married to this person. This person may not be safe." Like, there's so many different, like, possible real truths that you have to kinda come to grips with, and that's just, like, not what I was no one's prepared for that. You're just not really there's no
Yeah. Well, you were expecting one thing and you got something else, and it's like you're sitting here trying to protect yourself. Like, and I completely understand that. Sometimes with like everything that even happened to me, like I'm shocked him still married to me.
a good woman.
Yes, she is.
Yeah.
So, like during this time though, did friends or family have an understanding of what home life looked like? Did they know this was going on?
Yes and no. There was part of me like, my family very much operates under the belief of, like, nah, how do I say this? In a non-problematic way, maybe not, maybe that's wrong, but, like, if you and your spouse are having some sort of a disagreement, don't come bring that to the family and
Hmm.
cause beef in your own marriage, like, in a healthy way, try to solve that and resolve that between your own, and I think for me at the beginning, especially because I wasn't sure what was happening, I didn't know that it was a sickness, I thought it was, like, a character flaw. I think there was an element of not only self-preservation for my own ego, just, like, not wanting to admit that I married the wrong guy after, 32 years of thinking I was being smart, um, but also the idea of just, like, if this is something else, I want him to be able to heal on his own timeline without the scrutiny of a family that's not maybe his own yet, like, that he hasn't quite adopted as his own, and so, I remember on the day that he said he was moving out, I got in the car and started driving away because I was like, "I'm not gonna be here when you leave me, I'm leaving you," like, just, and I called my mom just, like, sobbing, and she obviously was like, "Okay, you don't sob, so what is happening?" And I told her, and I was like, "He's leaving," and she's like, "What happened?" I'm like, "I don't even know," and she's like, "Austi, turn around, go back home, you need to be there when he leaves. Then he needs to see that he's" like, she basically was just like, "He needs to be the one that walks out on you," like, kind of a thing, like, "Go be there, you'll be mad if you're not," and so my mom kind of talked me off. My parents, though, like, through this whole thing, start to finish, angels. Like, they when after he came back, I said, "You owe my parents an apology too, frankly, because like, just walking out on me, like, a month in is wild," and so he sat down with my dad, and my dad's a pretty intimidating guy, and he just was like, "I'm sorry, sir," but my parents didn't, like, hold it over him, they were like, "We're here to help you and support you," but
That's
that
that's really cool, and to have people that have your back and that are there through the thick and thin, I think is like really important.
yeah. Yeah, there was a time when, this was at, like, the peak of a lot of it when he was at a certain point started to turn to, like, alcohol and, um, was kinda leaning on that as a bit of a crutch to kinda get him through some of the stress he was experiencing, and I remember he was just, like, in a really bad place one day, but I had already kind of been babysitting him all day, and I was worried he was gonna pick up on that and try to go do something problematic, and so he wanted to go to the gym, and I said, "Yeah, why don't you go by yourself? Like, go have some alone time," like, trying to get him, like, autonomy, but still, like, a little bit of structure, and so anyway, he called me, and I picked him up, and I could tell from 40 feet away that he was in the middle of an episode, and he just was, like, kinda scratching, and it was terrifying, like, if I didn't know him, it would've been terrifying, but it's really just, like, heartbreaking, and he got in the car, and I instantly knew something was off, and he was just, like, shaking and scratching, and I basically drove him straight I called a crisis hotline and was just like, "What do I do? What what's what's the move here? I don't know what to do." And they were like, "You can go to an ER and try to do a detox or something." So I took him in there and he was just scratching and he had dandruff all over, like, he's just like this giant, like, kind of almost gorilla. He was just grunting and scratching and, um, he sat down in the ER waiting room right next to this little lady. She's like 5 feet tall, and my husband was like 6 foot tall, and he's like a big dude. And their knees are like basically touching, and he's just like grunting and scratching. And I just looked at her while I was like scratching his back, and I was like, he's okay. He's just having a bad moment because it's just like out of context. He's a
Yeah.
scary looking dude, but in context, you're like, he's just.
And curious, so what do they do when you're in the middle of an episode like that in the ER?
So we just waited in the waiting room. He asked the nurse for a drink, and she thought he meant water. And I said, "No, ma'am, he's asking you for a beer," which again is so funny 'cause I'm sober as the day is long.
Yeah.
And she's like, sir, we don't really hand out beer in the waiting room." And so anyway, they let us back in the room eventually, did some blood work, found out there was like no alcohol or drugs in his system, and then basically they wheel in a TV with a doctor of like a psychologist kind of a doctor, and he basically does an intake to see what kind of an episode this is, because clearly it's not substance induced based on the lab work. And it was really interesting because I had called my sister when I was driving to the ER, and I said, "Can you come meet us there?" I said, "Because if his sister hears about this, she's gonna think I'm doing something."
Yeah.
I'm like, "I need a second witness to what's happening." And so she came, and when she got there, he was fine. Like, he was just, like, perfectly normal, and she's like, "Hey, man, like, how you doing?" He's like, "Pretty good." And she's like, "Can I get you some food? Are you hungry?" He's like, "Yeah." So she left to go get him food, and then right when she left, he started acting kind of just, like, wild again, and during the interview, like, he didn't know what year it was, and that day, he had sort of told me that he had started to hear voices, and they were telling him to cut off my hair at night, and just, like, it had kind of escalated really quickly, and it just to the point where at that point, I was like, "Well, now that I know he's hearing these, like, voices, like, I no longer feel like I can keep myself or him safe." Before, it
Mhm.
was like a toddler running around with, a sharp object where you're like, "That's dangerous," but you can kind of manage it enough, and this was just like, if this guy decides to really, like, take me on in the middle of the night, like, I can't keep either of us safe. So I just kind of was like, "I don't know what to do." And so they ended up admitting him to a hospital, for psychiatric monitoring and stuff, and again, that his sister thought that
Yeah.
I did this and stuff, and it just was, like, so stressful and wild, but
And at this point, what does your mental health look like?
yeah, at this point, like, up to this point, I really am just, like, grin and bear it. Like, I'm not doing it well, like, but I'm supporting him, right? Like, I'm trying my hardest to pay the bills. I'm setting up all these different, odd jobs to make money and trying to, like, help him in all the ways that I can help. And I remember that night after the doctor was like, "Yeah, we're gonna place him in a facility, but he needs to just stay here till we find an opening." And I remember just being like, "Oh, like, I can go home and I don't have to, like, be on alert because I was like, someone else is gonna be able to watch him and keep him safe." And so I went home and I just was, like, in bed, like, for the first time I think that was the first time I could just, like, take a breath and was like, "What is happening?" I've been running a marathon for, like, 9 months and just not even processing what's going on, and when he was in the hospital, I felt my brain was spinning, and so what I actually did was he was in there for about a week, and I sat down that week and I decided I'm gonna journal everything, because it was just so many, like, conflicting thoughts and feelings and just chaos in my body. And I was like, "I'm just gonna write everything down." And so I fact checked myself, and I went through old text messages and timelines and hospital bills, and I documented to the day everything that had happened. And it was really interesting as I was writing it all down, I started to prove myself wrong and was like, "Oh, I thought that this, and this all happened in one day, and I was really mad about it, but it actually happened over the period of a month." But time was just, like,
It
compressing and
all
all.
blending together.
Yeah, and so by actually writing it out, I was like, "Oh, I can see very clearly my perspective on girl marries guy, thinks that he's some devious true crime criminal, waiting to happen, and that light that I kind of cast on the marriage at the beginning impacted a lot of the ways that I perceived things. But I could also see very clearly a parallel but distinct timeline of guy marries girl and is all of a sudden like, she's mad at me, like doesn't realize what's happening, and all these kind things that he had tried doing and realizing like, "Oh, yeah, like, I was pretty hard on him at this point," which makes sense because of all these things that were happening in my
Mhm.
world, but he wasn't perceiving it the same. And so I ended up writing for those 5 days straight, and I wrote like 115 pages, and at the end of that 115 pages, I just was like, "It's out. Like, I'm good." And it just like it just expelled from my body, and, like, all the tension and stuff was just really intense, but then I was like, "Okay."
Well, journaling is supposed to be a really I've never personally tried it, but it's supposed to be a really good, like, therapeutic
Mhm.
technique.
Yeah, I've never journaled long form like that, or the fact checking for me was really what I think was the most important because it's really easy in your own mind to be, like, on your own high horse about, like, "Oh, I was justified in feeling frustrated." And yeah, I was. I could see how that version of me got to that point, but I can also really clearly see his perspective, and that just gave me a lot more empathy and kinda put me in check of, like, "You have not been handling this well or gracefully or or whatever," and so that just kind of
And
cooled.
I don't know how in that, uh, type of situation you would not get frustrated, 'cause I think it would be a fairly normal thing to do, like, it's
That's the thing. I had a lot of people that were like, "Oh, like, why are you still with him?" And they'd ask me these questions, and that's, like, such an unhelpful question because I was really grappling with this idea of, like, I said better or worse, rich or poor, and I just happened to get, like, we're both as poor as can be and the worst possible, and we're both sick, and I was like, "What's the point of a vow if not to uphold it when it matters?"
Mhm.
And that's part of why I think it took me so long to get married in the first place is I was just like, I need to make sure I'm actually willing to keep that when things aren't perfect. And I think though, like it's really hard because I can see how like the caretaker position is really exhausting and it's thankless because you're going to all these appointments for your person trying to keep them up, but they don't actually like want it. But and it, to some degree you have to respect that like they don't want to be healed. Or maybe they do, but they don't know how bad it is, and then there's another part where it's like, yeah, but, like, at the end of the day, nobody was there for me. Like, even if I
Yeah.
wasn't there him perfectly, he wasn't there for me kind of a thing. But then again, when I wrote that thing, I was like, "I guess though, him cutting that bush, he was trying to be there for me." It just didn't land the way I was wanting, but, um, it's hard. It's hard for a different reason, though, I wouldn't trade in places by any means, but it's just this
Yeah, and it's
difficulty.
I think you need to talk to my wife about stuff. So these things are just overlapping, and I guarantee you guys could have a good conversation about it because it's just reminding me of stuff, that she's dealt with too, and she said about being the caretaker. Because it's like and that it took me years to realize, but no, nobody was helping her out. She was calling her brother when I was going through stuff, trying to figure out, okay, well, what do I do next? This is what Travis just said, but
Mhm.
it's so there's a lot of like little overlap things.
Yeah, it's a weird spot to be in, and you feel bad asking, and you also feel bad, like, my now ex-husband, but he's a very private guy, which I've said this before, but he and I talked after our marriage, and he gave me full permission to to talk about things, but, respectfully, of course.
Yeah,
But yeah, it's just like it's affecting 2 lives, and it's affecting, like, my family's life and his family's life. It's like mental illness is something that isn't just like this quiet little thing that you get to keep nicely and bring it out when you want to. It's affecting his boss when he doesn't show up for work. It's affecting, like, so many different elements, and it's so sad because it's very much treated like a character flaw, and it's just like, I married him because he has a heart of gold, like, he's just, like, such a sweet guy, and so it's just, like, so hard to look at someone that you love and just be like, "Oh my gosh, like, are you mourning? Are you
yeah.
mourning too? Do you even realize that you've left?" And, um, I don't know if he does or not, so
So, what misconceptions do you people have about severe mental health illness and marriage? What would you say they are?
great question. I mean, I can really only speak for, like, my own misconceptions. Mm,
That's fair.
I think there's this thing where society has drawn invisible boxes around mental health, and we say, "Oh, well, we can handle, like, a wife that's a little bit over anxious because that's, like, cute. That's cute that I get to be her caretaker, right, when my wife's a little
Hmm.
anxious or something." But there is this line that blurs, right? Where that cute, "My wife's so anxious, and isn't she a basket case? I love crazy women," like all these things that guys will say sometimes about like they, like this characteristic. But like as these things move along the spectrum, there's not a line that says this is no longer a cute, workable characteristic. It's now like a really difficult situation. But there's also a hard part where you're not just an either or. It can come on slowly, or there can be lots of situations in marriage where you're one way and then you're not anymore. If there's an accident or a mishap with drugs or whatever, and then you have to just kinda ask yourself, like, "Where's where's my own mental health boundary in all of this?" And, like, how much this is an answer I still don't know how to answer, is, like, should at what point should I have backed out? Or should I have? Should I double down and been more patient? Like, the vows of marriage are pretty clear, but the line of actual mental health between, like, I'm having some depression to I'm now, like, no longer functioning as a human, and then that next layer of, like, I'm now like, for me, my husband eventually got a little bit better, and then I felt like my immune system dropped because it was, like, finally, like, he's stable enough, I can now be weak for a minute, and then he wasn't quite there to take care of me though, right? So it wasn't
Hmm.
reciprocal, and some people never get that. Some people, it's just that's the thing about sickness in general, is just there's not a clear answer in the US for when somebody's not a triathlon body. You know what I mean? What do we do with that? And I don't know the answer, but I think there's a lot of hard conversations that a lot of people are having behind closed doors, and I don't think it's as simple as, "Well, divorce him if he's not being XYZ." It's like, if I developed cancer in the first week of my marriage, would I expect him to stay with me if I was suddenly bald and feeble? Yeah.
Yeah,
'Cause that's what I
exactly.
know, but
Well,
not everyone perceives it the same, so it's hard to
no,
s
and that's part of the problem with the world, though. Is
yeah.
sometimes it's going to come off a little bit harsh, not towards you, but sometimes I feel like from a worldly perspective, vows are not taken as seriously as you took them,
Correct.
and so I always admire people who take their vows seriously because to me that's what they are, and they should be taken seriously.
Yeah, I'm a very literal person, and, I think there's just this element of, like, in Christian culture, there's a lot of people that get married for a lot less, honorable
Yes.
reasons,
Yes.
and it's like, "Hey, go get it." But, I think there's just, like, a world where, for me, looking at the difference between dating and marriage is just, like, once I've said, "I'm marrying you," like, it's us.
Yep.
And so even, like, at the end, like, my everyone always is like, "Oh, man, you're so strong for, like, walking away," or whatever they'd say, and I'm just like, "I didn't walk away." It was Thanksgiving, and he kept asking me questions like, "Oh, do you ever wish that you had, like, dated more before you got married?" And I was like, "Bitch, I was 32, I had been there, done that, like, was ready to settle," but he hadn't, he had been in some
Yeah.
long-term relationships, and I said, "If you're trying to tell me that you wish you had dated more and experienced more, that's fair, but
Yeah.
don't get me to break up with like, don't get me to say it because that's not how I feel," and so finally he just was like, "Yeah, I think we should get a divorce," and so I ended up making him say it because I was like, I'm trying to ask you to, like, show up more in the marriage and, like, support me more and stuff. I'm not gonna say I was, like, happy in it, but I was willing to still put in the
To
work.
work to yeah.
But yeah. But I
So
will give him all the go ahead, go ahead.
nope, no, you finish your thought.
I was gonna say
First.
this whole thing has been very, like, "And then he did this and this." The thing about it is, like, in the moment, I really was a victim, right? I was, like, victim, victim, victim all day long. In hindsight, like, he and I had a really unexpectedly difficult relationship, and on the day that we, like, officially decided to get divorced, it was just kind of, like, really amicable, and even, like, after we were divorced, like, in sending him the divorce papers, I was like, "Hey, boo boo, here's the paperwork. Let me know if you have any questions." And he writes back and is like, "Thank you so much. Love you." Like, he and I love him so much, and I probably always will, and he loves me on some level. We've both decided marriage was not meant to be for us, but, it's just one of those things where it's like, we were both in an alternate reality, and we were not ourselves, and it was really I was, uh I was really ugly, and I wasn't proud of, like, who I was, and it just ultimately was, like, a really hard thing that's sad for both of us, and I think that, he had his own whole other side of the story, and um, this isn't he victimized me, this is I
Mhm.
probably victimized him, to be honest with you, and no one's really a victim other than the fact that, like, there's just not really systems or conversations or things to support it so that when these things start to happen, it doesn't just spiral out of control and you're left, like, in a puddle of question marks 2 years down the road.
And for when you guys decided to get divorced, was there a breaking point where you thought, "Oh, this we need a divorce," or was it just kinda like known?
I think it had been coming for a while because, like, when the substances started to get introduced, that's when I started to actually put some, like, ultimatums out there,
Mhm.
um, because it's like it's one thing for me if you're, like, schizoaffective, it's another thing if you're borderline alcoholic and, like, it's affecting the way you treat me, and there's just some other things that happened, right? And so, when that started happening, I basically was like, I can't also handle alcoholism. It's like, I just was like, I just was like, I found my limit, like, I can't, I just won't be able to make that work, and so that was kind of an issue toward the end, and I think ultimately, I think he decided and he was just backing out more and more and asking me more and more questions that were kind of implying he wanted it to be done. So that's why I just said, "I'm not gonna force you to be in a relationship with me." Like, a marriage is only gonna work if we're both actively trying to move forward with it, and that's when he kinda just called it, and I didn't fight him on it at that so
Makes sense. And did you ever struggle with feeling judged for choosing divorce despite the mental health circumstances? I'm just thinking of the culture that we live in.
honestly, I don't know if I can even say this without getting canceled, but I think honestly, like, subconscious racism was probably worse than the mental health. Like, I think it was kind of like I married somebody of a different race, and somehow that meant that this was coming down the I don't know, like, there just felt like almost like people weren't surprised that I got divorced, but they questioned, like, early on, like, "Oh, did you know this was him?" You know, like, they kind of, like, almost questioned, like, him, and who he was as opposed to, like, this weird circumstance that we were in. I'm not sure if that makes any sense or if that's problematic to say, but that's the vibe.
No, no, it totally makes sense.
So, I think most people were really supportive of me getting a divorce by the end because I put so much of myself into it. Like, I literally spent, like, my life savings, spent, like, medical bills, like, I did everything, and I can't say I did a good job. Like I said, I was a bit of a bitch sometimes, but, I did everything I could with the skills I had, and I kinda just, like, put it all out there, and so I think my family in the end, when we got divorce, they were so respectful of him, um, and to this day, my family does not we don't talk negatively about him. His sister a little bit, but 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 him, it's just kind of like he's a sweetheart, and, um, I think my family was just like, "You did everything you could," and the hard part about it is I think, like I said earlier, once he was a little bit more out of the woods, because he was pretty stable the last probably 9 months or a year of our marriage, I was really depleted, and I couldn't seem to get myself out of the woods. Like, I was to the point where I was like, "I can't hold a job right now." And so it really affected me and, like, honestly, till very recently. Um, and so I ended up going back to his doctor and being like, "Hey, can we talk about me now? Like, could you prescribe me some meds and stuff?" Because I just was like, yeah, I just that prolonged exhaustion and fight or flight and whatever, one point I woke up and was like, "I don't think I can move for a while." And I just laid on the couch for probably a solid year, just processing.
I don't know how you win it. It's there's only so much caretaker that you can give before yourself starts falling apart. And I've seen this with my own life because my wife, I've always been the anxious one, the one with depression, but she'll probably beat me for saying this, but she's not listening right now. So
Let's let's put
full,
it to
but
test.
she's been dealing with some anxiety problems herself.
Mhm,
So, but so she's kind of she's seen a different side of it. She's been able to I want to say have more empathy for what I was going through,
mhm.
and she understands a little bit more of the anxiety side of it. And but then I've come to understand what it's like more to be the caregiver. So it's just this reverse role. And I'm not saying that I still don't have my shit problems
Yeah.
because I do.
But that's the thing, I think it's naive to think, "I'm a caregiver, and he is sick," right? Like, I
Yeah,
think it's what life is, like, we are in different roles all the time, and I think the more you identify with a role, the more God's gonna be like, "Oh,
yeah.
so funny that you thought you were healthy,"
Well,
and
you just have to become flexible.
yeah.
And that's one thing I've learned is, especially when it comes to like the marriage side of things. I know sometimes like if I have one of my seizure episodes, I'm going to be down for a bit.
Mhm.
And I know that my wife will be able to take care of things. But if she has something, I know she's going to be down for a bit. So,
Yeah, it's really made me evaluate, like, people have been like, "Are you ever gonna get married?" Because I already was kinda like one of those, "I don't know if I'm ever gonna get married" kinda people. And I said, "Ironically, I'm actually more likely to get married now than I was before I got married," because I could see how if it went well, it would go really well and the benefits
mhm,
of it. But I think more now than ever, I saw, like, if I'm laying in a hospital bed and they turn to my spouse and they say, "How do you want us to handle this?" I need to know that I can rely on them to make a decision that I would be comfortable with, like,
mhm.
it truly is like a partnership, and I've always known that, but I've seen, like, okay, when you're not healthy enough to sign your own paperwork, who are you entrusting to be there, the pen in their hand, and I think, it was, like, a really humbling, scary experience, but I think it also was, like it just taught me a lot, and like I said, I'm really appreciative of him, and I've honestly, like, done a lot of healing, and his picture pops up on Instagram, and I'm just like, "Aw, cutie," and then just keep moving. Like,
Yeah.
I don't feel anything toward
a-
it. So,
And how do you talk to him today? Do you ever reach out to him
um,
now?
he called me on my birthday, and he called me like one other time. I think we didn't talk for the first year. And then after about the first year, he reached out and was like, "Can we chat?" And I think he at that point was just a little sobered up and was kinda like, "Hey, like, how's your family? They were really good to me, and how are you doing?" And so he and I are fine. I try not to, like, I think we honestly still follow each other on Instagram. It's one of those things where, like, there's no romantic feeling in the least on either side, but it's one of those, like, we went through some stuff together, so
Yeah.
we're gonna be tied
So you
together
you you
forever.
have the respect and you still love him
Mhm. Yeah. Yeah, I love him to pieces, but you'd have to rip off my own arm and feed it to me before I'd
before.
cons and he said the same thing, but our last call was so funny because it was kinda one of those, like, "We might not talk again," and we were like, "To be clear, I love you, and, like, I wish you well, but, like, we will never get back together, and also, I don't wanna know if you're dating someone else because it's just, like, we're not that kind of friend."
Hmm.
So but, like, if his mom was to pass or something, like, I would call him just because there's a tender heart in my spot, but or tender spot in my heart, but not it's it was the time that it was, and it's in the past now.
So I'm kind of going back a little bit backwards from what you were just talking about a few minutes ago because something popped up in my mind. You mentioned there was about a year where you just kind of wanted to lay on the couch. How are you doing now? Do you still feel these kind of spouts of depression or anxiety or whatever you want to call them?
Yeah, it's funny, this whole thing, I've been like, "And his mental health, and his mental health," and it's the exact,
Yeah,
like
I'm throwing it to you now.
that's what I did, right? I'm like, "Oh, wait, yeah, this wasn't a podcast on his mental health." That's the thing, though, I was in avoidance the whole time, and so, really, once it, like, calmed down and everything was gone, yeah, I just laid on the couch kind of in shock, and, um, I just have not like, well, for a long time, probably the first year, I just could not face, like, carrying a job, doing simple things, like, just, like, calling like, just going to, like, Mother's Day. Like, I skipped Mother's Day because I was just like, "I can't put on pants." Like, things like that when you're just like the depression is just like, I can't even face, driving 5 minutes down the road, and so there's just a lot of things that you start to realize, like, you're not processing normally, and the amount of exhaustion that you have, um just kinda wins out, and so, yeah, there was a lot of anxiety over things I've never felt anxiety over before. There's a lot of events that never caused me any worry that I just didn't opt into, and really only recently well, I started working for myself a couple years ago, so it's been about 3 years now, and I just started doing odd jobs because I was like, "I can handle short, little, non-committal," things, and then it's kinda slowly evolved, and so now I'm building something that I can actually that works with my energy and my skills and my whatever. Um, but yeah, it's taken me 3 years to get back to even somewhat normal, and even now, it's
It,
not the same. I can't even
it's not this.
it is the same.
Yeah, it's not the same normal. Like I really think that once you hit a certain level of anxiety and depression, going back to normal looks completely different because you have to find ways to or techniques to deal with it because it doesn't go away.
Yeah, and there's a certain level of, like, I've probably been fairly performative in my life of, like, not being super vulnerable, and this whole experience just, like, cracked me so wide open that, like, I have a really hard time not being, uh well, I'm a lot more just, like, vulnerable and, like, willing to jump into that, but it's interesting because that's not how, like, my friendships have always been, and, it's just really interesting how it comes up because like, I was on a Marco Polo responding to a friend, and she's like, "How are you doing?" And I haven't talked to her in, like, a decade, so it should be like, "Oh, I'm good, how are you?" But I just, like, was like, "I'm doing," and then I just started, like, sobbing, and I, like, couldn't figure out how to turn off the Marco Polo because I was, like, panicking and crying, and I was like, "So sorry." And so that's I've kind of gotten through that phase, but it's been hard because, like, I was really devout and going to church and stuff for a long time, and just, like, I can't even get out of bed in the morning and hold a job normally, and so there's been a lot of things that were, like, my go-to stabilizing things that I couldn't quite access, and so now I'm finding myself just kind of, like, staring at the road ahead being like, "I don't know what the next 5 years looks like," because it's just, like, it's not gonna be what it was gonna be. It's a different road now, I don't know what that looks
Mhm.
like, and so in some ways, it's really refreshing because I feel like I'm more in tune with, like, my real self and who I wanna be and what I want, and in other ways, you're like, "Have I just fundamentally broken the space-time continuum and I'm never going to" It's like
I can fully relate to that,
yeah.
to basically all of it that you just said, because I've had times where I haven't wanted to work. I've had times where, like, Kim has had to basically push me to get out of the house.
Mhm. Yeah.
So
Yeah, and it's
it's
hard, just being and I could say, like, as a single person, it's hard because then you look toward partnering or finding, community, and it's like, well, it's hard to consider that when I don't know if I can really show up reliably for someone. But then you think about it and you're like, that's kind of what partnership is. But then you also think about it and like I have a brother who has a chronic illness, and I know he's struggling a lot with like employment and that kind of thing and the wear and tear that takes on a marriage, and there's just like so many things where it's just a blessing if it goes straight, like, if it just goes
Mhm.
the way you thought, just congrats to you,
Well,
but
if
other than that, it's like life is really messy, and it's amazing we get through it.
yeah, and it's like if it just went straight, it's like, what would life be? If it
Yeah,
it just went the way we all wanted it to go,
yeah.
I can tell you I'd be sitting in a bigger house, probably have a bigger yard.
It's that's the thing though, I'm grateful to be single with no children because I can lay on a couch for a year,
Mhm,
and a parent can't do that, and so there's just, like we all have these seasons, and I feel like I probably had it as easy as it could get in terms of, like, I had a supportive family and, um, I don't ever claim to have the hardest marriage. I say I have a good honorable mention for, like, a wild story because there's stuff that happened that was like, "Well, that was wild," but, a lot of people have it a lot harder than me, and I just think it's, like I wish I had a better manual or something I could pass along to the next person that's going to experience it, but it really is just like, I don't know what to even say.
it no. Well, it's definitely a learn as you go type thing, because everybody handles these types of situations completely different.
Mhm.
Do you feel like there's something that society could do to, better support families with conditions like schizoaffective disorder before the relationships completely collapse?
Um, yeah, I mean, there's a certain level of education, right? Because I think, um, when you feel, like, embarrassed, like, "Oh, something weird is happening in my marriage, it's not happening in everyone else's," there's an element of, like, I wanna keep that to myself. And part of that I think is healthy, because I don't think it's good to be like, "This is what I'm struggling with," and
Mhm,
every little thing. But I think there is a world where, like, just having a better understanding of those types of things, like what is psychosis and what causes it, and, what's the approach to tackling it? Because there's a lot of people still that are like, "Oh, I can't be medicated because there's a stigma," and I'm decades past that, like, I'm like, "Sounds good," or whatever, but there's still stigma on so many different elements of it, of therapy, of medication, of just being less than perfect, and even in our society, it's just like feels like a huge thing to raise your hand to, but it's just kind of like it's not. In some ways, it's like it shouldn't be as big a deal, and in other ways, we should make a much bigger deal about it because I do think to have occasional quirky anxiety or whatever and full on bipolar or something are very different. And
Mhm.
the spectrum needs to be clearer that these are not just like, it's not that close on the spectrum. The spectrum's
No,
actually pretty
yes.
wide and it can happen to anyone at any time. It's not just for the person who's lived a certain lifestyle and they deserve, like, it's just like all these like weird things that people disassociate from the reality of like anybody's sibling or parent could become this.
Yeah, I agree, and it's basically what you said, education. Like, I feel like see, I'm trying to think how to word this. Even as when I started this podcast, I knew little bits, pieces of mental health, but from the stories I've heard, I've obviously know more now, but schizoaffective was one of the newer ones to me in the past, like, 6 months.
Mhm.
'Cause
Yeah, it was,
this
well, even just the
yeah,
diagnostic approach, like, I felt very fortunate because we went to a therapist who then was like, go see this guy." So he referred us to that guy who then was like, "Oh, this is what it is." And he said, "This is psychosis, but if you go meet with this guy, he'll actually give you a diagnosis." So then we went to him, and it was like a total miracle because I called him 'cause I just got referred by people, and when I was like, "Hey, I'm just calling because like, this is going on and, like, money is tight, but, like, I'm trying to figure out what's happening." And he was like, "Oh, wait, your last name is this?" He's like, "Do your parents live over here?" And I was like, "Yeah." He's like, "Oh, your parents and my in-laws live next door to each other, like, I'll just do it for you for free, and it's normally like a 3-month wait and, like, thousands of dollars." And I was, like, literally crying at work in the closet, just like, "Thank you so much," 'cause I
that
do just feel like I can't afford this, and so it was a complete miracle, but even then, it's just, like, to have the ability to, like, I can take off work right into the doctor. Like, there's just so many things where it's like some people don't have that flexibility.
mhm,
Just it's a full-time job, just manage health, and that is such a hard place to be regardless of what the health thing is, if it's physical or mental or whatever. It's just like there's sometimes you need a job to manage that, and that's not always doable. So,
that's for sure. I agree with everything you said right there.
I really wish, like, I could just become super wealthy, and then I would just basically go stand at the doctor's office and
Throw out money to
just throw out money because that's the thing is it's like, if people can't work because they're sick, then they
how are
yeah, it's like
how are they gonna pay the bills? Yeah,
pay
it's
the bills, and then it's like makes them sicker because everything runs on money, and so it just is such a hard position to be in, and you're like, "I'm just trying to, like, live. I'm not even trying to live a lavish life. Like, I'm not even asking for anything fancy. I'm just trying to, like, keep the love of my life alive, and that shouldn't be so hard, but there's just, like, so much red tape and stuff that I really feel bad because I feel very blessed because it happened right away. I was already in my 30s. I was financially established. So although I spent the entirety of my life savings, I had savings. You know what I mean? So it's like, yeah, I have $400 in the bank. That doesn't feel comfortable. But also, other people have negative hundreds of thousands of dollars from things. And you know, my husband and I got divorced and he went back with his family and I don't have children to manage. Like, there's so many harder situations than what I have. So, um, I just think, uh, I wanna save the world with paying for medical bills. It's like
well, this it doesn't take long for them to stack up.
no, not at all. And that's the thing that's, like, so wild is, like, you go to the doctor and they're like, "It's free for now." And then you get a bill and you're like, "What the?" And then you're expected to have the energy to go show up and fight the bill and pay and I'm like, "No, this is a racket and it needs to stop immediately."
I had to take my wife to the hospital a few weeks ago.
Hmm.
With our last baby, she went into preterm labor, and so she thought something was going on with this one that's due any day now, and she just got the bill for it. We weren't even in there for maybe an hour and a half. It was $1,900. I mean, we didn't have to due to insurance, we obviously don't have to pay that much, but that's what the bill was written for. And I was like, for real? They didn't really even do any. They did like one test and put a monitor on her, and that
Yep,
was it. That's
yep.
all. And I was like, about died.
That's what's so the whole thing is just so wild and, and you're thrust into these situations, right? I thought this with car accidents or with mental health. It's like, wait, you're gonna take him to a mental hospital? Is that billed differently? Like, how do I know that's in network? Like, there's just so many things where it's just like, it's impossible to do all of the research ahead of time to know how to handle every possible situation that can be thrown at you.
Yeah,
And then all of a sudden, you're just in the world's most stressful situation trying to navigate, like, paperwork. This is the
yeah.
last thing I need is to have to think about this,
And then sometimes, maybe this is the conspiracy side of me. Sometimes I wonder, it's like, well, you're going through all this trauma and life's just throwing all these obstacles at you. How do we know people just start taking advantage of us?
they are yeah, that's the thing, that's because then, there's so many people that is the case. Like, it's
Hmm.
wild to think that. So yeah, it's just been really eye-opening and humbling and scary and all the things when you just all of a sudden are like, "This is a whole aspect of life that I've never been privy to," and now you're like, "Oh my gosh, there are people that have dealt with this for decades and will
Yeah.
continue to deal with it," and that's just where it's like, the system needs to fundamentally shift. So,
So I have like one more question here and kind of two follow-up questions.
'kay.
It, if someone listening feels ashamed for struggling in a relationship affected by mental illness, what would you want them to hear today?
Just think back to myself. You're talking about specifically the caretaker, like the spouse,
Yeah.
the
Yeah. Yep.
yeah, it's mm, I don't even know what to say other than just like, you're not a bad person for not knowing how to react to something that you never planned. And that doesn't mean that you can't try to handle it better or whatever, but there's a certain element of kindness that you need to have with yourself just to like get through it. Um, One thing my mom said that I didn't do a great job of, but she kind of put it in perspective was just basically like, when you look back on this, like you want to be proud of how you handled things. Cause at some point this is going to be over with and you're gonna have to, account for it, and so it's just kind of like try to handle it in the way that you'd be proud of if this were over, and that's a really hard thing to actually do in the moment, but it's it's true on the other end, or if there is no other end, then at least, you're trying to be the best person you can through it so that you're proud of yourself, and I think that's the hardest part is you're gonna lose a lot in all of this, you're losing relationships and expectations and everything, but like, the one thing you have control over is just the narrative, like, that's how you react and and so that's not great advice because it's just so, like, "Good luck."
Mm, That's no, that's I
But
like it because it's if you think about it, it's pretty simple. It's and I don't always know if there's great advice to be given in these situations because in all honesty, they're
if there was
it's
one way
hard,
to
it's
get through it,
tough.
there'd be a book on it.
Yeah.
And so there's not. It's a custom experience for everyone, and at the end of the day, it's your story and whoever it is that you're helping, and I'm like, you know, don't I can't say don't give as much because it's like I don't really regret working myself to the bone because I have no regrets about how much I put in. But at the same time, someone who maybe gave up earlier than me and still has the ability to work, good for them. So there's not really a right way or a wrong way to handle it. It's just trying to be something that you can live with the outcome
Mhm.
and be proud of yourself because that doesn't need to be an added weight that you deal with for the next decade. So, but
Very well said.
sending love to whoever you are 'cause it's not easy.
And this one I asked because sometimes people come on here to, promote something which you're not really doing. You're honestly just sharing your story. But is there, how can, if you're interested, like, how can people get a hold of you? Like, is there a website you want to throw people to or anything?
Yeah,
Totally up,
no.
totally up to you.
So I started while doing all of this, like, the 9 to 5 does not work when you're kicked out of that, and so I started, like, my own company, you could say. It's, like, me and a couple of friends, but, basically, it's, like, to help people find alternatives to 9 to 5s. So if there's somebody out there that's like, "This 9 to 5 thing is not working for me," and they're looking to start their own business or just need some other side hustle kinda way to make money or just a way to, like, approach life differently. If they want to, they can, reach out to me online, or our website's chroniccreative.co, and it's just about, like, I'm basically just trying to help people figure out how to live a fulfilling life when life doesn't doesn't exactly go the way they want. So, that's just a resource there if anybody, wants to chat or is, like, looking for that, because that's just kind of, it came out of necessity when my own 9 to 5 just wasn't an option anymore. So, I've got resources, and I'm doing it really just to, like, help people get to that next spot of sanity and safety.
I love it. And the last thing here is, uh, we covered a lot of ground in our conversation. Is there anything that we did not bring up that you'd like to bring up?
Um, I feel like I jumped into triggered mode a little bit and kind of, told a lot of his story, so I wanna just reiterate that, like, if you are the person who is struggling with the mental illness, like, the same thing to the person who's the caregiver is, like, neither one of you want this for you, and you don't deserve this, and this is not, like, again, it's not a character flaw, it's just, like, this happens to be the hand you're dealt, so just know that, like, if there is someone in your life that's trying to take care of you, like, just I hope you both love each other, and you're both having a hard time, so if you can both be patient with each other trying to get through it. But, my heart goes out to you because this is not a one-sided, thing, and this is not happening as a result of, like, your bad behavior. This is just a really hard thing to even ask to go through, and I wish you both all the best. So,
Awesome. I love it. Well, Austi, thank you so much for coming on the show, and thank you for being a lifesaver and jumping on in a
anytime,
day. So
anytime.
just a little audience side note, Austi is a friend of my wife's. So my wife actually reached out to her and said, "Would you want to do this?" And she accepted. So thank you, thank you. And
Happy to help.
I think you have a great story, and I thank you so much for sharing it. I uh, admire the person you are and how you try to make things work.
Thanks for having a platform like this. I think there's a lot of people out there going through a lot of really unique things, and it's good to know that we're not the only one, so I appreciate it.
And thank you to all those that are listening. The best thing you can do for us right now is, if this resonated with you or if you know somebody that is struggling, please share this podcast and give us a follow and leave a review. Thanks again. Till next time.